right, great. Well, again, thank you all for joining us here tonight. We're here for Fall Seeds with the Mass Audubon. In this virtual presentation, staff members from the Mass Audubon will use local plants to highlight the many ways humans use seeds in their daily lives. We're going to discover the different methods of seed dispersal and solve the mystery of how plants, unmoving in their ways, spread across the planet. And this program is appropriate for adults, teens, and children ages 8 and up. And as I had mentioned, the Tewksbury Library has partnered with area museums, aquariums, and zoos to host virtual learning opportunities every Thursday this fall. This virtual learning series is brought to you with federal funds provided by the Institute of Museum and Library Services and administered by the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners. So let me let another person in from the waiting room here. So all 10 of us watching live, and I'm sure the hundreds that are going to watch on YouTube. Let's give a big virtual round of applause to Erica for joining us here tonight from Mass Audubon. And Erica, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, and thank everybody. Thank you all for joining me tonight. It's kind of a nice size group. If it doesn't grow really big, then maybe I can actually interact a little bit more. But we'll see how many people join us tonight. My name's Erica. Every once in a while, I guess my name tag might show. And I'm coming from Habitat, Mass Audubon Habitat Education Center Wildlife Sanctuary here in Belmont, Mass. And I am more used to seeing faces. Not on the screen. I like to be outside with people, but I'm hoping to encourage you guys to get outside. I've been doing programs for about 20 years, from preschool to adult programs. And I like to say that I know a little bit about a lot of things, and I'm not necessarily the expert in any of them. And I want to encourage other people that they don't feel like they need to be the expert either. An enthusiast, I think, is a much better word. So one of my biggest goals right now is that I'm hoping to make you interested enough, or entertain you enough, or excite you enough, or make you curious enough to go outside and to do some exploring on your own. Find some hidden treasures of your own, and let's see if we can get you interested in doing some of those things. So I'm going to go into fall is the time of year that both seeds and leaves fall as plants are preparing for the winter. Dormancy is a common survival strategy for plants and animals, and seeds are a really great way for that plant to stay dormant. Many people go out to look at the colors outside, the leaves, but when you're outside, I'm hoping to encourage you to look at some of the seeds that are all around too. So dye it, drink it, or fasten your shoes, but seeds are not boring. My idea, so what's with the silly title? I thought we could have a little bit of fun with different ways we use seeds. Seeds come in all shapes, all sizes. Some are so small they're almost microscopic, like orchid seeds. The coconut that's in my hand there on the right is the largest seed that we have in the world, and that is not a fruit. That is actually a seed all by itself. And it's a pretty big seed, so it's a good example. I think the one, right above that are little poppy seeds. They're small, but not even the smallest that we have. So this is kind of a pretty slide of all kinds of different seeds, supposedly, but I wonder how many of these things really are seeds, and I think we'll get back to that. So, is it a seed? Is it a nut? A legume, a fruit, a drupe, and I'm sure we could come up with a lot more botanical terms. So in culinary terminology, the fruit or maybe just as you're hanging around the kitchen making a salad or asking people what they want for dinner. A fruit is usually any sweet tasting plant part. A nut is usually something with a hard casing, an oily plant product with a very hard shell. And a vegetable is what the word we usually use for any savory or at least much less sweet plant product. But botanists get a little bit more technical than that. So we're going to look into that a little bit more. What is a seed? Sorry, I started for just a minute. I thought I rearranged these, but I'm back on track. So a seed is like the final stage of reproduction of the plant, though reproduction is a cycle, so you can also consider it a beginning. I think that's how most people think of a seed. But as far as the plant is concerned, its major goal is to get that seed produced and spread out so that it can continue its species and continue propagating more plants. But in particular, a seed is it's a baby plant. It's dormant, but it is very much alive. And any one seed has these three parts. So the embryo in this picture, you see here, there's a little tiny plant. And here's the little tiny plant there. And you can see it in the big one also. They would have a little protective coating. These have thin little shells on them. And the rest of this whole business here is a food source, called the endosperm, but a food source for that tiny embryonic plant that's right there. So gymnosperms were the first seed-producing plants. And the first seeds were thought to have been developed about 360 million years ago. And they were very simple at that time as things were evolving. Gymnosperm is a term that means naked seed in Greek. And it's a naked seed because it's not inside a fruit. It's not inside any protected part of the plant. And this picture of a cone here, our conifers are probably our most common, what we know of around here for the gymnosperms. Conifers, ginkgo trees are gymnosperms, but most of our plants do not grow as gymnosperms anymore. So gymnosperms don't have a flower, they don't produce fruit, the seeds just kind of grow, well, out in the open. Most of the plants that we have are called angiosperms, and they have this protective area here, the ovary of the plant, and if the flower is pollinated, the seeds will develop inside of here, and they are, the ovaries develop into the fruit of the plant with the seeds inside. This is just one example. I went out into my yard to find an example of something that I could take a picture of, and it's a morning glory flower with its seed pod here, and so that's actually the fruit of the plant with the seeds inside. Now, I don't have a date on when we evolved, when angiosperms came about, but they were much later, and as the plants evolved, the plants, or through evolution, figured out that it is very advantageous to be able to protect the seeds. So this coating that was developed around it, it's definitely became such a successful adaptation that almost every plant we have now are angiosperms. So that was a seed. So what are all these other things? A fruit. A fruit is just the ripened ovary of the plant, or the body that is going to hold the seeds. A nut, a lot of things we refer to as nuts, a botanist says is not a nut. So strictly speaking, a nut is a hard-shelled pod containing the fruit and the seed inside. But the part of the definition that's important is that this pod and the fruit does not open on its own to release the seed. So it's not going to pop its seeds out. It's going to take an animal or something to crush it or to actually start germinating and break through that cell, that hard case. And because so many things are called nuts, I think a lot of people have heard that peanuts are not really nuts. They grow underground. Peanuts are legumes. And a legume is just a seed pod with seeds enclosed in a pod, like the beans, like these here. Almonds are not a nut. They are over here. This is an almond plant, and they are a drupe. The most common drupes that we know are things like the peaches and the cherries, where there's a fleshy outside and a hard shell on the inside. We usually call that the pit, and inside the pit is the seed. But the fact that there's that fleshy outside makes it not a nut. And there's a lot of other terms, but we're going to go back to seeds. So, so now we can consider this again. Are all of these on these seeds? So I got this slide from a colleague of mine who did a similar presentation and said, here, you can use my slides. Well, there's a couple of hers that I have mixed in here. And after I put this in and took a look at it again, I thought, okay, how many seeds are really showing here? So the acorn here, that has a seed inside it, but that's not a seed. This nut in a husk, we just said that pecans aren't even really nuts, but you don't see the seeds there. This is the mulberry fruit with the seeds very close to the surface, but not quite there. This is also a sycamore fruit. I'm going to show you that a little bit later on. I'll show you how the sycamore turns in, what their seeds look like. So there's a lot of things on here that really aren't the seeds. Here we can see the seed inside of this samara and inside of the maple samara too. I think maybe this one and these are seeds here. There's just a couple that really actually show the seeds. So now that we know the official definition of a seed, I'm going to move away from the technical terms here and look a little bit more at some fun activities to do with seeds. So before we move too far away from what is a seed, I did this little experiment to show how a seed wakes up or starts developing as it begins to germinate. This could be a fun project to do with your children or with your grandchildren. Frankly, I don't have my children around and no grandchildren yet to share this with, and I had fun doing it on my own. So this is the first time I had done this for this program tonight, and I revealed them this afternoon. So what I did here was these two, I used pea seeds and I planted them 10 days ago. These two were planted 8 days ago, then 2 6 days ago, 2 4 days ago, and 2 2 days ago, so that now I can pull them all out of the soil and see what they look like at these different stages. And honestly, since I'm used to interacting with people, I had all these ideas of ways that I was going to interact with you, and then realized that via this particular method, it's really going to be easier for you to see what I'm doing if I just photograph it and not do this right in front of you. But I've got to say that breaking all of these little things open and finding the hidden treasure inside was really kind of fun. I wish I could have done a little bit with you, but that was part of the reveal. And here's what I came up with. So these are the original seeds. The ones that I put in 2 days ago have expanded. So these look pretty shriveled. These have gotten wet now, and they've just started to produce a little bit of a root. The root is going to come out first. 4 days ago, there's a little bit more of a root. Now I put the better samples on the top and a little bit more of a dud on the bottom. But so both of these are 4 days ago, but I'll be just pointing one. So 6 days ago, that one has a pretty good sized root now, and the little tiny plant is starting to come out. I don't know what happened to the second one. I am glad that I put more than one in. And I have no idea what I did 8 days ago, because the 2 seeds that I planted 8 days ago, one didn't do anything at all. And the other one, I think, started rotting away. So I don't know if I put too much water on it or what, but I don't think those are gonna help us much here. And then the ones that I did 10 days ago, this one just barely started to grow, but this one cooperated with me nicely. So 10 days ago, now it has a good root system. It has a little plant that has already developed a few sets of leaves. And we have a little bit of a sequence here now. Whether that's a good way to see how it germinates or not, I thought it was kind of an interesting thing to try. Another way to do it is a very simple way that a lot of nursery schools or other people might have tried before, and that is just taking a seed, putting it against the clear jar. That's a wet paper towel right behind it, and you can just watch it germinate through the glass there. Kind of a neat little way just to see how it grows. I didn't start this very long ago, so my picture doesn't really show you much, but if you were to do this, just keep it moist inside. You'll see it slowly growing in there. All right, we're going to go to something else. So anybody thumbs up if you know what these things are? Does anybody recognize these? Yeah, got a thumb or two. Does this give anybody else any more hints? So these are black walnuts. Black walnuts, and I only learned this through putting this little show together here. They are drupes also. They are not nuts. And apparently somebody has defined this outer husk here as fleshy, so it doesn't qualify in the nut group. But these are black walnuts, and black walnuts are often used to make a really beautiful dye. So I thought we'd give that a try and see how that comes out. In fact, they're so good at staining things that if you were to try anything like this, make sure that you have, old clothes, gloves, things like that. A friend picked one up yesterday when we were out, and she wanted to get the seed out from the inside and started taking it apart and came to me and showed me her hands. I'm like, oh, you didn't tell me. They were, I felt kind of bad. I should have told her that her hands were going to be brown pretty quickly. So I took these 5 drupes, these black walnuts, put them in a pot with water, and now onto the silly title that I had. Here's our diet. So I started by boiling it to break down the outer husk. Apparently you can try smashing it with a hammer too to break open that outer husk. It's the inner layer right underneath this outer husk that has all of the, where the dye will come from, that has all the color pigment. So you have to get this green outer part broken open. I boiled mine. I tried to smash it. It doesn't smash very easily. And then I had this mess. So I boiled it until the stuff started coming apart. Then I strained it all into this cheesecloth. So if you wanted to take it all, put it into a mesh bag or wrap it up in cheesecloth, just so that you can separate it from the dye itself and not get all little bits of the hull all over whatever you want to try to dye. I wrapped it up in the cheesecloth. I put it back in and simmered it for another hour before I used it as dye. Black walnut is a very color fast dye. So if any of you are natural dye aficionados, or maybe any dye aficionados, you might know what a mordant is. And black walnut doesn't usually need a mordant. It usually is very color fast on its own. And at the end of the program, we'll come back to what my dyed products ended up looking at. All right, another thumbs up if you know what these are. Not me. I might have been cheating a little bit because nobody usually takes this close a look at these things. How about like this? Does that anybody recognize that? So this goes to my drink it part of my silly title. This is staghorn sumac, and these are out in the field at Habitat, where the sanctuary I work at. And sumac is really beautiful this time of year. It usually grows, well, in a meadow that's been undisturbed for a while, or at the edges of the meadow. You won't find it in the forest, but it can grow quite large, 10 feet tall or something like that. It is a native plant that grows these berry pods this time of year that are edible, and they actually have a kind of a nice flavor to them. Now, I've taken students out and done this with students before, and I've gotten quite a few kids to actually pop these little things in their mouth and to try them after we wash them off with a water bottle. But they have a fuzzy texture to them, and I can't say I'm really crazy about eating the berries straight off, but I do know a number of people who like to take the berries and make a drink out of it. So I took 4 actually of those staghorns, those berry clusters, washed them well. I put them in a pitcher with water, and in retrospect, I can tell you, if anybody feels like trying something like this, 4 was more than I needed for that amount of that size pitcher. But anyway, we put them in water. I put them out on my nice new screen porch and let it sit out there a day. Maybe we should better call that a sumac tea, but I've heard a lot of my colleagues call it a sumac lemonade, I guess because it tastes a little bit like lemonade. I have to tell you that when I was writing this up, this reminded me of, it has nothing to do, there are no lemons in it, so whether it is, holds the name of lemonade or not, it reminded me of the vegan mac and cheese I made last week for my vegetarian son, that of course had absolutely nothing to do with cheese, so I don't know what his name's from. Anyway, so, or fasten your shoes. So that one I'm referring to Velcro. Swiss electrical engineer George Demestral introduced the first touch fastener, the hook and loop fastener, after in 1941. If this were more of an interactive program, I would have asked people to guess when Velcro came about, because I was pretty surprised at how early that was. But in 1941, he went for a walk in the woods and wondered why he came back with his coat and his dog covered in these sticky seeds, or this burdock. This is called burdock here. He took a close look at it, and he thought that he could turn it into something useful. And he worked on that patent and patented a hook and loop closure in 1955. Hook and loop in the early 1960s, I couldn't find a picture of it, but apparently it looked very cheap and unappealing, and the clothiers, the clothing industry, wasn't very interested in using it in their apparel, so it wasn't highly used for a while. And the first notable use for this Velcro came in the aerospace industry, where it helped astronauts maneuver in and out of bulky spacesuits. They didn't care if it looked fashionable or not. It was just really easy to get in and out of these spacesuits if they could be Velcro closures. And eventually, Demestral was selling 60 million yards a year through a multi-million-dollar company. So it did take off. And now it seems that every young child has shoes with Velcro on it these days. I went to my neighbors next door and said, I need models. The 3 of you, anybody have Velcro shoes? I want a picture. They ran inside, and all 3 of them ran outside just a couple minutes later with their Velcro shoes on. I could take their picture. We can find Velcro in all kinds of things these days, in our own shoes and cable ties or watches, and we can even hang pictures up with Velcro. This is what Velcro looks like up close, and this is what the burdock seed looks like up close. So we can compare how close that is. So it really does have these little hooks that will hook onto any sort of fabric that has any kind of loop or any sort of nap that it can grab onto. We have a little bit of a mixed audience out there, so maybe our experiences will differ, but I know that I never had Velcro shoes when I was a kid. So I wonder if you want to think back and see when you can think of when your life was full of Velcro like it is these days. I don't think it was all that long ago. But when I was preparing this presentation, I was talking to my mom on the phone, who is actually in the audience right now, thank you. And she told me the story. In Germany, when she was young, it was somewhere in the 1950s. She had a good friend who was very into fashion, liked going to Paris, she liked dressing Parisian. She came over one day with big excitement, and she ran in and said, "Here's the latest thing," and she ripped off her belt and showed everyone how her belt fastens with, it wasn't called Velcro at the time, but it had these hook and loop fasteners. And this was the new thing at the time. And it really must have been, because it wasn't patented until 1955. So I liked that my mom had this story. She must have really seen some of the very first Velcro out there. So more fun with seeds. These are my 3 little next door neighbors. I gave them a little clump of milkweed seeds, and they chased after those seeds for the longest time. They had the greatest time chasing all around, blowing these seeds around. Which leads to ways that seeds get around. So seeds do need to get away from their parent plant, or probably more accurately, the parent plant needs to disperse their seeds to avoid overcrowding, to create no colonies elsewhere. They don't want to be competing for the same resources as their new seedlings, so they want to send their seedlings away as far as possible. And plants have evolved lots of different strategies to send their seeds away. So pardon the silly icons here as I show you some examples. Wind power. That's probably what we're most familiar with if we were to think of how seeds move around. Dandelion is a pretty common one. The maple seed's a pretty common one. And it is probably the most common dispersal method for seeds. The way that many plants get their seeds away from the parent plant. The maple seed's design causes them to twirl to the ground. So they catch the air like a helicopter's blade, and they end up looking like the twirling helicopter blades, carrying them away from the tree. This is another wind power. A lot of plants have a way of, or put their energy into building these wings on the side of their seeds. You can see the seeds in here, this one here and over in these. But with the wings attached, that whole unit here is, my cursor, the whole unit here is actually considered a fruit called a samara. Sometimes pronounce that wrong. It's called a samara. The flattened wings, that papery tissue, develops from the ovary wall of the plant. But a lot of plants do make these little wings on the sides of their seeds to help them catch the wind and get away. Ash tree is a nice plant that we have around here. You might have ash trees in your neighborhood. Japanese knotweed, on the other hand, you might also have. But I always like to point out when we do come across an invasive species, because this is one that produces lots and lots of seeds. I think the seeds are really pretty, actually. This is the plant up here. It produces a lot of seeds. A lot of seeds get dispersed, and this kind of plant really can take over an area in the way that a lot of invasive plants do. Here we have some parachutes. These are the milkweed seeds, not the exact ones I gave my neighbors, but this is the kind of seed that I gave the little kids next door. Similar to the dandelion. Do you see the little parachute? You can kind of see how there's the little passenger and the whole thing here being the parachute. Very easy for the wind to catch that and blow that away. Milkweed seeds, this is the whole milkweed pod, or this is the milkweed pod here. And if you find a pod that the seeds haven't dispersed yet, the way the seeds are laid out in the pod are really, it's a really pretty design. It's these fish scales that you see over on the side here. Really pretty how that they lay in there. Cottonwood tree. I don't see very many of these, but every once in a while I'll come across something wherever I'm taking a walk, and it'll really look like snow on the ground until you get closer and take a look at it to see that these are seeds. The cottonwood tree has a lot of these little parachutes that get caught in the wind and carried around. And sometimes you will find places where they blanket the ground like that. Sycamore tree, and that's often a tree that towns, cities use to line the, on the edge of the roads. You might have some sycamore trees around. And this one here is the fruit. It's a spiky fruit. Here it kind of looks spiky too. You might find those spiky fruits. It looks much more like a prickly ball, but it will eventually burst into hundreds of these tiny little fluff parachutes here too. Witch hazel is known for its explosive means of seed dispersal. On a warm fall day, you might hear a very audible, random snapping of the seed capsule bursting open. And this is witch hazel over here. It can actually propel its seeds for yards. That's how explosive the opening of that seed capsule is. And you might even hear the rustling as it hits the leaves on the floor or something like that. Witch hazel is a fun tree to point out at this time of year. It's October, the month of the witches. And it's the only, this is the flower here. It is the only tree that we'll see around in our area that actually flowers in October. So if you do come across a witch hazel, see if it has these little yellow flowers on it. They're pretty in this picture. They're not very showy on the tree. And in fact, I have looked at a bunch of witch hazel trees this year, and I don't know if it's due to the drought, but the trees that I've been watching aren't flowering yet. I don't know if they will still, or if they just lost out this year because of the lack of water. Jewelweed, spotted jewelweed. It's a nice native plant. Often lives in, or usually lives in wet areas, so in a wetland type of area. And these seeds are launched by these little green springs. When the seed pod, this is the seed pod here, when that is ripe and ready to burst, it takes just a very minimal touch, sometimes not even a touch if it's very ripe, to explode. Also giving it the plant's other name of touch-me-not. I think there are more than one plant called touch-me-not, but this is one of them and the reason why. Now, jewelweed is really my favorite. I really wanted to show you how much fun jewelweed is. Send everybody out to look for jewelweed. Once you meet it, it'll be your favorite too. And it really can entertain all ages. Here I meet with a high school class from a Waldorf school nearby once a week in a park near me. And I introduced them to this jewelweed. And they were having a ball with the jewelweed. So these are little videos. So did you see this one? You didn't really have to squeeze it. I don't know. It pops so fast you might not have even seen it. But whoops. So of course, right before I pulled my camera out, they were screeching and hollering and having a great time with these seeds and making all kinds of noise. But as soon as I pulled the camera out, they were very subdued about their reaction to the popping the jewelweed seeds. But they had a lot of fun with that. If you were to scrape off the seed coating here, the seed underneath it is this really vibrant turquoise blue. It's really pretty. That's why I like to think it's called jewelweed. If you ask others, they say that the leaves underwater, it does grow near water, so I guess it would be likely that sometimes you would see the leaves underwater, or if they have dew on them in the morning. They're covered with these tiny, tiny hairs so that they will appear to be silvery, jewel-like, with underwater with just a little bit of water on it. I like to think it's because of the turquoise. There's always time to stop and pop jewelweed. Whoops. Moving on. All right. I expect most of you have come across sticky seeds. Many of your pets might have too. This is my poor old little doggy here, who seems to always find the sticky seeds. And three different examples of kinds that we find in our area. This is the burdock that started off the velcro craze. Beggar ticks is a pretty little wildflower before it turns into the seeds. And this is what the seeds look like before they're caught on you. And if you were to take a close look at them, they have these little barbs on them. These people usually call these stick tights or stick seed. And I suspect everybody knows how effective those are at getting away from the plant. You might carry them all the way home again. An animal might carry them for quite a long time before they either drop off or pull them off their fur themselves. So my silly little idea for your next suggestion for your next walk among fall seeds. I do this with students, but you might have guessed by now I have fun playing outside even without students. But if you're going out, maybe you don't want to have a sock on your hand. Maybe you could take a strip of fleece and tie it onto your wrist, or have something freely flowing, and don't be afraid to get too close to the edge of the path. Even if you're not intentional about picking up seeds, it might be a fun thing to see what you go home with. This is the next very common way for seeds to get around, is to be eaten. These plants have evolved to have tasty little berries that attract the animals. The animals eat the fruit, and the seeds pass through the digestive system undigested themselves and are placed elsewhere, leading us to call them the ins and outs. They'll go into the animals and they'll come back out again undigested. Poison ivy berries, in case anybody's interested, you don't see them very often, but they're out there. The Asiatic bittersweet, a lot of people know that this one is also an invasive, but it's a beautiful plant, isn't it? Which is how a lot of invasives came to us. People found them someplace and thought they were really beautiful. Let's bring them over here and plant them in our yard. And the berries are really very tasty to the birds. Birds love the bittersweet berries. They'll eat the berries and they'll put them out someplace else, and we'll have bittersweet all over the place. And bittersweet can climb up trees and be heavy enough on the trees to actually pull the trees down. So it's not a friend to our area. Beech nuts. There are lots of animals that eat beech nuts from beech trees. Bears do, white-tailed deer eat the beech nuts. Fishers, porcupine, wild turkey, grouse, wood ducks, some birds like tufted titmouse, lots of rodents, probably a lot of other animals too. And there's a good reason for that. The beech nuts have about the same protein as content as corn and 5 times the amount of fat, which doesn't sound great to us, but it sounds great to the animals who are trying to stock up for the winter. They have twice as much protein and twice as much fat as the white oak acorns. So these are in high demand by the animals of the forest. Nuts have a different strategy than berries and apples. Nuts are not going to pass through like acorns, are not going to pass through the digestive system unmolested or unbroken and undigested. Trees that produce, or plants that produce nuts will produce enough so that they can sacrifice some to being eaten, making them tasty treats for the animals, in order to get some of their nuts away from the tree. And they are a blue jay's favorite. A blue jay can actually carry 5 acorns at a time. I would really like to see this, but so says the researchers. They have a pouch called a gular pouch in their throats, in their upper esophagus. They can actually carry up to 3 nuts in this pouch, 1 in their mouth and then 1 at the tip of their beak. I don't know how often they do that, but I think it's pretty impressive that they can do that at all. There was this study where 6 birds were fitted with transmitters. They each collected and cached, which means, stored away for later in the winter, 3,000 to 5,000 acorns in that one season. That's a lot of acorns. So blue jays really are very much the friend to the oak trees as far as spreading their acorns around. They actually stash more acorns than squirrels do. So if the blue jays are out there stashing away 3,000 to 5,000, the squirrels are closer to around 2,000, which is still a whole lot of acorns to be stashing around. And granted, there are probably a lot more squirrels out in the forest than blue jays, if we're going to count them both. But blue jays do contribute quite a lot. Blue jays don't bury their acorns like the squirrels do. They usually tuck them in crevices in the tree to save them till later, or holes in the tree and so forth. They most likely get planted when they get knocked out of these crevices. Quite possibly, if he's carrying 5 acorns, he drops 1 on the way. So they do really help carry it around, and some of those tasty treats get left behind to grow. Squirrels are scatter hoarders, like we've seen them digging holes all over the place, and they've been recorded at burying over 2,000 nuts and still being able to recall where they've buried all of them. Or maybe they can smell them. I'm not sure if they smell them or really remember all of those spots. Sometimes they even guard the spots that they bury them in, because other squirrels might be watching and they might come and dig them up and take them to their own caches. So it's a pretty competitive thing out there to collect those acorns. However, black oaks, they stash acorns of all sorts, but black oaks are very high in tannins, and they can't be eaten right away. So the animals will stash away black oak acorns for the end of the winter, just in case it's a really bad winter. If there's months of starvation and they really have to resort to the black oak acorns. And then by then, it's thought that having sat in the ground, maybe water has leached through them and has washed away some of the tannins so that they're more edible later in the season. And then on the right, this isn't the best picture, but it was such a fun story, I had to share this one. Again, out in the park with this class of Waldorf high schoolers. One of the girls were off on the side watching something, and I went and asked her what she's watching, and she said she's watching the squirrel carry nuts up the tree and carry nuts back down the tree, and we watched for a minute. And the squirrel was running down the tree, and before he got to the ground, he was maybe 4 feet above the ground or something like that. He decided he needed a snack right then. So he is hanging by his back feet only, and he took his front feet to hold his little acorn, and he's sitting there nibbling his acorn as he's hanging upside down on the tree by only his back feet. And I just thought that was a really funny thing to come across. We called him frog-legged, this squirrel hanging by just his back feet out there. Mast ears for trees. So this is a friend of mine who collected this many acorns, these 2 barrels of acorns, in just 2 days worth of acorns falling last year, which was a mast year. Mast years are years that the trees will produce a huge amount of nuts comparable to other years. So the squirrel populations and other animal populations that eat the acorns will adjust the amount of available food. If there's not enough food and there are too many animals, the excess, I guess, the animals will die off to the amount of animals that can be sustained by the amount of food out there, of course. So if a tree consistently produces the same amount of nuts every year, the population of animals that eat those nuts will fit the amount of nuts that are out there. If there's more nuts, that will feed more animals will be able to survive, and they will compete with the amount of nuts out there. So trees have evolved to have every certain number of years, and I don't know if anyone has figured out exactly how a tree decides when they have a mast year. But once in a while, they will have a year where they produce a huge amount. So this isn't enough to increase the population because it's only 1 year at a time. But that particular year, there will be plenty of excess nuts so that this tree will ensure that it is spreading enough seeds around that it's not only producing tasty treats for the animals of the forest, but it is also producing enough fruit to plant more seedlings of its own. We're back to my walnuts. And another dispersal method. So drop and roll. I asked these high school students of mine to tell me what dispersal method, seed dispersal method, they thought this black walnut used. I had one of these with us. And the first guess was, animals, in and out. The animals are going to be eating these. But these things are 2.5 to 3 inches across. So it's not going to be an in and out situation. There's certainly no animal out there that's going to be eating these undigested, or they have the seed inside undigested. The seed would need to be completely chewed up. So some animals might contribute to spreading these around by collecting them and taking them and forgetting where they've left them. But just yesterday, I saw a squirrel running across the street with one in its mouth. And this is a big thing for the squirrel to carry. It was obvious that he wasn't getting across the street very easily, and he really had a prize. He did not want to lose it. So my guess is that animals that are going to collect these, unlike acorns, this is a whole lot more food. They're probably going to keep better track of the ones that they've actually hauled away. And that's not going to be as good a dispersal method, expecting the animals to carry this around, even if it is tasty fruit. So these things are heavy enough to roll away if there's a slope nearby, and that is another dispersal method. Some more that might drop and roll. And we've seen these seeds before. So there are a lot of seeds that have more than one dispersal method. So acorns are carried around, but they could also be roll away. This is horse chestnut and a buckeye chestnut. Then we're going to move on to shakers. Maybe this is just a way of, wow, we're really close on time. Calling wind dispersal by different names, but these things will be shaken out, but they're held in these little pods until they're shaken out. And lastly, dispersal by, no, not last, I'm sorry, second to last, dispersal by water. That's a coconut's only dispersal method, by water. Palm trees that are near the edge of the water, the coconuts will float, and they'll float someplace where they can be planted. Cranberries are a local example. Cranberries have little pockets of air inside the fruit, and because of this, the cranberries can float in the water. This is how they're harvested. Many of you might know that. A grower will flood their bogs so that, and then agitate them a little bit so that the seeds float to the surface, and it's easy to collect them that way. But if left to nature, you know, in a rainstorm or something like that, they could also float off to a new place to plant themselves. These over here are cattails, and since we're running a little low on time, I'm going to jump ahead. But cattails, you can kind of see they might actually have various methods too. They do blow away, but they can also float away on the water. And then finally, dispersed by fire. There are plants that depend on fire to release their seeds. Not many around here. It's not a great dispersal method around here because we don't have many forest fires, but there are definitely trees in the West that depend on fire to release the seeds. In Massachusetts, we do have pitch pine. There's a lot of pitch pine on the Cape. And pitch pine is a local example of a plant that depends on fire. So their cones are completely sealed with resin, and it actually takes the heat of a fire to melt that resin to let those seeds out. Some plants depend on fire for, and they require some sort of chemical signal from smoke and charred plant matter, something like that. But most of the ones that depend on fire, it's because the cones are sealed up with resin. And so I'm going to say it's now time for you to go outside and take a closer look, explore, and happy fall. I have a couple things that I could show you. I think I will quickly just snap through these without much discussion. As far as going outside and taking a closer look, well, I'm not paid to sell this, but this is really a fantastic field scope. But anyway, take a closer look outside. I just took these photos this afternoon. I wasn't sure if the presentation would be long enough, and I decided to throw in some of these. This is taken through the microscope, but some of these seeds are really just interesting to look at through the microscope. This is one of the sticky seeds. And the rest of these, I've got to admit, are more for aesthetic purpose than anything else, because I can't tell you even what kind of seed it is. Some seeds that I found around. But I think that's fascinating to look at up close. And look at these. This is one. This is the one on the left is to show you scale. These are the lines of my palm, so they're very tiny on my palm. And this is the seed, the flower head with all of these are individual seeds. You can see the little parachute. I love this one. I don't know if it looks like a little torpedo or something kind of fancy. I just think they're really neat to look at up close. And this one, I'm not exactly sure. It's tiny, sat like this on my finger. And I believe this is the seed down below there, but I don't know what these shoots are. If anybody in the audience wants to suggest something to me. And so I'll come back to you again. I did say that I was going to return to a couple of things, and we're running low on time, but I will at least show you. I'm sorry, pardon me for pulling my phone up, but this looks blue in this light, and I promise you the sumac tea is not blue. So with the right light on it, it did make a really nice tea or sumac lemonade, and it is tasty. I can show you what I pulled out of the dye batch, but if there are questions, maybe Robert can tell me what questions there are, and we can see about those.
Sure. So, Erica, we can multitask here. Frank wants clarification. Is a horse chestnut a drupe?
That's a good question. I have to think about that for a second. I believe that that one is a nut, because that one, the horse chestnut, has a very spiky outside. No, it's not, because a horse chestnut will open on its own. You'll find horse chestnut husks on a trail just broken open. If the seed ripens enough, it'll open on its own. So it is not a nut. Good question. Thanks for challenging me.
All right. And let's see. Susan just says thank you. And Diane in the chat has also made some sumac-aid. And she says that she puts them through a coffee filter to get rid of those little fuzzy hairs you were talking about. And yeah, that's really it for comments and questions. If anyone else has any comments or questions, get them into the chat and we can address them. And we can go a few minutes long, Erica, if you want to show us a couple of things.
Well, this is really not much, but this is a t-shirt that I dyed in the walnut. It was a white t-shirt ahead of time.
Oh.
I have different samples that I dyed for an hour or 2 hours and so forth. I'm not going to pull all those out at this time. But this one was in for a number of hours, but it really did dye it quite well. And you can put this through the washing machine a number of times. It's going to stay this color now.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. That's about it that I have. I did make some, because I was thinking of the fun ways that we could play with this stuff, I did make some paint that I made this lovely picture. You can tell that I am not an artist, but it was fun to crush up some, this is raspberry, and I crushed up some blueberries and, who was the other one? Oh yeah, cherry, blueberry and cherry. So they did come out with different colors. So I just crushed them, sifted them through a sieve, and put a tiny bit of flour in there just to thicken it just a little bit. And it was kind of fun to paint with. So.
There you go.
Yeah.
Fun for all ages.
Have fun.
Yeah, you have to have fun. So I don't see any additional comments or questions. Diane also says thank you. So Erica, why don't we wrap here? Do you have any last words you wanna give to the group?
I think I've told them often enough to go outside and have fun with seeds or anything else you can find outside.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming tonight. Want to remind folks to check their email tomorrow morning for the feedback survey. Let us know what you thought about tonight's event and what you'd like to see for future events here at the library. And just a reminder that in 2 weeks, the Tower Hill Botanic Garden will be here to talk about tough plants for tough places. So hope to see you with that one as well. So thank you all again, and I hope everyone has a great night. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thanks again, Erica. Cheers.